I hope Jaczko has a plan B because if plan A was to get rehired by the nuclear industry, he just destroyed plan A, that's for sure.
And no one would know better than you, right?
That's right. My experience is would parallel his in that regard.
So now we've talked a lot about the sort of, I'll say, cherry picked numbers or the bad numbers that get fed into a formula like this. But on the other end of that formula is what's really coming out. Arnie, can you talk a little bit about the comparison between what the SAMA analysis believes might pop out on the other end versus what's really happening? And perhaps Japan is a good place to start.
Well, if we look at what happened after Fukushima Daiichi, we have contamination 200 miles away. Let's look at Tokyo. When I was in Tokyo, I took 5 samples, and those 5 samples would qualify as nuclear waste here in the United States and would have to be shipped to Texas for long-term storage. Well, the SAMA analysis doesn't assume that any contamination gets out beyond essentially a mile or two. So what Daiichi told us is that we have societal risks out to several hundred miles, and we have massive contamination out to 50 to 100 miles. Well, the SAMA doesn't include decontamination. It assumes that the soil remains in place. There's no power washing of homes. There's no decontamination of farms. There's no decontamination of vacant lots. None of that is in the SAMA analysis in close, let alone out at 100 miles or more. So the net effect here is that what Daiichi should have taught us is that if you have a nuclear accident, society is going to be severely disrupted, not just within 5 miles of these nuclear plants, but out to a couple hundred miles. And the cost to displace people and essentially ruin their lives is not factored into the SAMA analysis. And I think that's what Chairman Jaczko said when he was a chairman, when we recorded him at the Regulatory Information Conference. And that's what he's saying now. He hasn't changed his tune one bit. The industry just doesn't want to face the fact that a nuclear accident can disrupt lives.
Because right now their formula is telling them that it's all worth it.
The secrets and the assumptions, Kevin.
I would think we must have known that more could be affected than, the most immediate area around the nuclear plant. Why wasn't the SAMA analysis updated following any historical nuclear events?
Well, the party line on 3 Mile Island is that nobody was killed and the containment withstood the accident. The 3 Mile Island presentation that's on our website that I made back in Harrisburg 4 years ago clearly shows that the containment did crack in the hydrogen explosion at 3 Mile Island, and that enormous amounts of radiation were released. But the industry didn't want to admit that, and it managed to avoid it. And of course, Chernobyl was communists running that plant, and if capitalists ran it, it would be run better. So the net effect is that the industry just ignored 3 Mile Island and ignored Chernobyl. And continued to move forward. And now we've got, Daiichi, which is run by capitalists and is a modern reactor, and the containment did blow up. And yet we're still not facing the reality here in the United States that the cost of an accident are a lot more severe than what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is willing to admit in their SAMA analysis.
Final question for both you and Maggie. If we were to put accurate, well-represented numbers into the input of this computer code, this formula, the SAMA analysis, how do you think that would change the way nuclear power is done today?
I think it would dramatically change it. I think especially all of these aging nukes like the Mark I BWRs that have such huge risk associated with their spent fuel pools and the amount of radiation they would release, I think that economically they'd all have to be shut down immediately.
Arnie?
I made this argument to the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards for the new plant at Vogtle. And I went into it's called the SAMDA analysis because it's into the design phase. I made the argument that you're assuming the containment doesn't leak. And the NRC said to the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards that, yes, that's right. Containments do not leak. Well, we just blew 3 of them up at Fukushima Daiichi, and yet the NRC has not gone back in to reevaluate that assumption. The net effect would be that these plants would not get relicensed and the new ones would not get built if we properly included these costs in the cost-benefit analysis for nuclear.
So it just wouldn't be worth it.
It would clearly show that the risks outweigh the benefits, and that's not what the nuclear regulator nor the nuclear industry wants the public to hear.
Arnie, Maggie, thanks so much.
Thank you for having us, Kevin.
Well, that about does it for this week's edition of the Energy Education Podcast. As a reminder, you can view the video referenced in this podcast with former NRC Chairman Gregory Jaczko by clicking the link next to the show. You can also join us back here next week and every week for more on what's happening in the world of nuclear news and more nuclear technical discussion. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For Fairewinds Energy Education, I'm Kevin Hurley. Thanks for listening.